Good morning and afternoon, everybody who's joining us today. And in case you're watching this recording at 9 p.m., for whatever reason, good evening. My name is Salam Bhatti, and I am the SNAP Director at the Food Research and Action Center, happily known as FRAC. I am so happy to see that we have this webinar for you today and that Irene Lewis has done a phenomenal job in preparing today's session. She's got some great panelists for you today. In fact, not just some, all of the panelists are great and they're going to have a great discussion that we get to participate in and ask questions as well throughout the webinar. So thanks to everybody for coming today. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the Mickelson 20mm Foundation for the opportunity to do all of this work. And we're also really excited to share some great materials that Irene has been working with you in the days ahead. Now, this is an issue close to my heart, not just because it's really painful to see when people are trying to work themselves into a better way of life, but that their efforts are stifled thanks to all these burdensome restrictions. It's also close to me because I was living in poverty when I was going through law school. And when I, learned about SNAP being accessible to those who are pursuing higher education, and I looked at the regulations and the eligibility restrictions, I saw that I was not eligible because I was not going to work 80 hours a month while I'm doing full-time law school. So I barely had enough time to do my homework. I didn't have any more time to work. So I'm really excited that FRAC is looking into this and that Irene has done some phenomenal work in this. So I'm gonna stop being her cheerleader and let her come out onto the field. Come on up, Irene.
Thank you so much, Salam, and thank you everyone for being here. Stephen, you can go ahead and start sharing slides whenever you're ready. Hi, Hope. But hi, everyone. I'm Irene Lewis. I'm a SNAP policy analyst at FRAC, and I'm really excited to be able to bring you all this presentation. As Salam mentioned, we've been doing a lot of really incredible work with students and with our organizations at the state and federal level to really advance student SNAP access. And so just a little bit about FRAC. We are a national anti-hunger organization really working to address poverty-related hunger through the federal nutrition programs. And today we'll focus specifically on SNAP. Next slide. So the Supplemental Nutrition Program, or SNAP, is the largest nutrition program administered by USDA. It's our first line of defense against hunger, food insecurity, and undernutrition. And it's a really effective and efficient program because it allows for households to supplement their food budgets or grocery budgets by using an EBT or an electronic benefits card, just like a debit card to purchase their groceries. SNAP also bolsters the local economy by adding $1.50 to $1.80 into the economy for every $1 that a SNAP household spends. Additionally, SNAP is federally funded, so the federal government funds benefits, but states are responsible for administering the program through screening for eligibility and managing caseloads. Next slide. So SNAP is a critical program for so many low-income households, but particularly college students face specific barriers when trying to access SNAP. So a 2018 report from the Government Accountability Office found that only about 31%, so less than 1 in 3 students who could be potentially income eligible for SNAP were participating in the program. And this is because students face specific barriers when trying to access this critical program. First, there's some stigma and misunderstanding around what food insecurity and looks like for college students. Today's college students are not yesterday's college students. College students today are more likely to come from low income backgrounds. They're more likely to be first generation. And so it's really critical that we bridge SNAP as a program for them. But as it stands, the student rules are extremely complex. And there's some administrative burdens that college students uniquely face when trying to access the program. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what these special SNAP rules are for college students. So first, regulations define college student as anyone attending an institution of higher education, like a college, university, or trade or technical school, more than half-time. More than half-time is determined by the institution. So I remember when I was in undergrad, half-time or full-time was considered 15 hours or more. And so the institution is responsible for determining if a student is more than half-time. But these students must both meet the regular SNAP eligibility criteria, including gross income and net income tests. In some states, they have to meet certain asset tests, and then there's federal citizenship rules. And so in addition to these requirements, students must also meet one additional exemption, and we can go to the next slide. So these exemptions, I think, are the specific point that make the student eligibility rules really unique and sometimes complex. So again, in addition to meeting the gross income test and the asset test and the citizenship standards, students must also meet one of the several things listed on this list. So they might be under the age of 18 or over the age of 49. They might have some physical, mental, or cognitive disability that they've been screened for or have attested to. They might have a child under the age of 6, or be a single parent enrolled full-time and be taking care of a child under 12. One of the most popular exemptions that we talk about is known as the work to eat rule, which states that a college student must be working at least 20 hours of paid work or paid employment a week, as Salam sort of alluded to, in addition to their course load. And so this also might look like participating in some work study program or an on-the-job program. It might also look like being a part of a TANF funded jobs program. But all in all, these students are required to participate in work as well as manage and balance their course load, as well as meet the income eligibility standards. So in addition to these, during the pandemic, we can go to the next slide, there were some additional exemptions that were added. So Congress expanded SNAP in a lot of ways during the pandemic to address the economic and health crisis that the country was experiencing. And one way that Congress did this was through the Consolidated Appropriations Act, where they added 2 additional exemptions to this list. So the first one was that a student had a $0 expected family contribution on their FAFSA. And the second one was that the student is eligible for some work study program, regardless of their participation. And the second one is really important because it's noted that in a lot of universities, there are more work study eligible students than there are work study jobs. And so, there's a net imbalance of students that need these jobs. However, these extensions were only temporary. The public health emergency ended this past May. And by July, thousands of students that would have been eligible for SNAP, given this expansion, could potentially not be eligible if they don't meet one of those other in that long list of exemptions. Next slide. So we're going to talk in this panel about sort of the impact of the complexity of these student rules, but we're also going to spend some time talking about advocacy and legislative and state and federal level work that's being done to expand access to SNAP for college students. And so we're really excited to have this panel of amazing experts who both have experience in the program, work through their professional lens, but also through a personal lens. And so we're going to welcome Erin Kuntz, the program director at the Center for Healthy Communities at Cal State Chico, Mark Huelsman, the policy and advocacy director at the Hope Center for College Community and Justice, Emily Demps, a student and student worker at LSU working in their food pantry, and Zeph Schnellbach, the student basic needs officer for the UC Student Association. So we're going to ask them to come on camera. We'll go ahead and remove the slides, and we're really excited to have this conversation with you all. I also want to remind folks that you can use the Q&A feature to submit any questions. We had some prepared questions for our panelists, but we also wanted to give you all space and time to ask them any specific questions you had. And also thank you for the questions that you all submitted during registration. They gave us a lot of really good data about what you're looking for and how we can direct this conversation. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. We're going to get started with Mark. So really grateful for the work that you all are doing at the Hope Center to really highlight student basic needs. But can you talk a little bit about sort of the work that you all are doing specifically related to the data that you all did the research that you all did during the pandemic that really shined a light on what basic needs insecurity and specifically food insecurity look like for college students?
Sure. Thanks, Irene, and thanks, FRAC, for hosting this incredibly important discussion. So I think the first thing I would say is that we know from, about a decade of research now that basic needs insecurity and food insecurity in particular is long running, it's persistent, and it exists at all institution types. It's not something that just showed up during the pandemic. And the Hope Center, where I apply my trade, as well as others, have consistently documented high rates of basic needs insecurity through our regular basic needs survey, which the most recent one that came out, which was sort of at the beginning to middle to height of the pandemic, however we're measuring it, found that 1 in 3 students enrolled in higher education report low or very low levels of food insecurity, and another about 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 report only marginal food insecurity. So probably predictably, but tragically and fixably, students who have been systemically marginalized, whether that's Black and Brown students, Native and Indigenous students, first generation students, parenting students, LGBTQ plus students, report disproportionately high levels of food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness. We also have recent federal data from the Department of Education and sort of every 4 to 6 year survey that they do that showed that, sort of at the beginning of the pandemic, that showed quantified that about 4.3 million undergraduate and graduate students are experiencing food insecurity, and that undergraduate students are actually experiencing food insecurity at twice the rate of all other US households. So, this is something that's real, it's ongoing, it's systemic. It requires federal, state, and institutions, to come together to address, especially if we're going to put our money where our mouth is on student success and retention, if we're going to put our money where our mouth is on living up to our stated ideals on having a just and fair economy. Now, as with so much across the economy and across the country, the pandemic exposed or worsened this problem. Higher education has been dealing with an exodus of students. We're serving, or the higher education system is serving 1.1 million fewer students than it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And the existing SNAP rules, and I know we'll get into this a little bit, which, as Irene really eloquently laid out, create added hoops for students to jump through. It's incredibly complex. It's inconsistently administered. It's based on faulty assumptions about students' financial lives. That subjects students to work for food rules or different exemptions, probably never made sense, right? And certainly didn't at a time of massive economic upheaval. So as we've seen, sort of across the country, that folks' financial lives, as sort of the initial financial shock of the pandemic hit, as the cost of pretty much everything increased after that. That hit students in a particularly difficult way and has had reverberations, sort of throughout the higher education system and the economy broadly.
Thank you so much. I also appreciate Merritt in the comments for clarifying that federal policy states that students roll at least half-time. So thank you for that clarification. And I really appreciated what you said, Mark, about really putting our money where our mouth is in terms of prioritizing student success, retention, graduation rates, etc. So Aaron, I was wondering if you could talk a bit about when the pandemic happened, since you've been doing this work at the Center for Healthy Communities, how have you seen sort of this data play out in real life for students on campus?
Yeah, happy to. So I think that just a little background, we have a contract in California with 50 college campuses across the state. And then we also support all 149 across the state through technical assistance. So we have a lot of good data on that 50 that we work with. And so the first thing that we saw was that we saw a significant increase in the amount of students applying for SNAP. And that momentum has actually held up to today. So we saw an initial jump likely due to those additional expanded exemptions and awareness for students. And then we've seen that really, dip a little bit, but it's really consistent. So I think the message is that we see that students are still really needing these resources and they're finding out about them more, which is a good thing. But we also know, as Mark mentioned, like when we look at California, we have about 50% of students in California still experiencing food insecurity, right? And we know that there's a good chunk of those students that, because of the SNAP college student eligibility rule, they need those resources and they can use them, but they're not likely eligible. So that's where we're at this, this part that just makes it really challenging.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I'm gonna pass it off in a second to Zeph and Emily. But I think just shout out to them. We have two amazing students that have been able to join us. And I really appreciate when students are able to join us in these advocacy conversations. So if you're a student, feel free to put in the chat where you're a student at. I personally am under the assumption that like your alumni network is a really good resource for you. And so if there's anybody, if you see a student who went to your alma mater, feel free to reach out to them. I would love to be able to just facilitate this ecosystem. But Zeph, I would like to ask you, you work as a basic needs officer in California, and you work directly with students who are seeking support through programs like SNAP. So can you share a bit about how critical SNAP is for college students that are experiencing food insecurity?
Yeah, so as Irene mentioned, I am the UCSA Basic Needs Officer, which basically means that I represent basic needs across all 10 campuses within the UC. And pretty much SNAP benefits are something that college students depend on entirely. And that's not only me just speaking from experience as someone who does rely entirely on SNAP benefits for my food, but also between my friends. And essentially, like, there are so many things that we have to worry about as students, whether it be our health, our studies, our housing, especially within the UC system. Housing is a really, really big issue that we have. And so a lot of us turn to SNAP benefits so that there's one less thing that we have to worry about. However, there are a lot of obstacles for college students as we're exploring in this panel. I know that I literally just had my SNAP interview yesterday for my renewal. And I might lose my benefits because I worked just under that 20 hours a week this last like 6 months period because of like budget cuts in my job. So I'm really happy to be here. And yeah, so just like in short, sorry, I have like a habit of rambling sometimes. It's quite early in the morning for me, and I did have a final yesterday. But essentially, SNAP is critical to not only like our wallets, but our livelihood as students, especially in areas such as Davis, where we only really have grocery stores that are kind of expensive. The cheapest grocery store we have is like Grocery Outlet, and even then, like it gets pretty pricey.
Thank you for sharing that, Zeph. And again, thank you for being here so early, and shout out to both of you because final season. So I really appreciate that. Emily, I'm gonna pass it off to you. Can you talk a little from your experience at LSU, you know, how critical it's not for college students? But to go a bit like a step further, could you talk about some of the challenges that students face when they're trying to get connected to SNAP?
Hi, everyone. As I was saying, and as Zeph was saying, SNAP for college students is a really big deal. Every dollar counts when you're in college, especially when you're also paying for college by yourself. Loans are really expensive. Finding time to work and working 20 hours is almost near impossible as a college student. At that point, if I worked 20 hours, I wouldn't be able to stay enrolled as a full-time student. I can't make time up out thin air, unfortunately. With SNAP specifically, you also have to factor in college students who are going to college in a state different than their home state. For me, I go to school in Louisiana, but I'm a resident of Georgia, so my SNAP application was automatically flagged when they saw my Georgia driver's license. On top of that, with the phone interview and having to prove that you work 20 hours a week, students don't have that type of flexibility in waiting on the phone for a SNAP officer or working 20 hours a week consistently to make that 80 hours in 30 days. That's almost near impossible. At that point, you're not able to complete your homework or sleep or go exercise or spend time with your friends. So I know I have tried multiple times with assistance from our food banks, our partner organizations, and have failed each time to get SNAP. In turn, that means other resources are used more heavily when we could be using SNAP, but because of these specific rules, they are not eligible. I know certain states, which was mentioned in the chat, have made kind of exceptions that they've kind of gotten away with, saying that being a full-time student is considered like work training and job training. However, that has not happened in the state I go to school in. So it's really hard for students to apply. And for my friends who have gotten it, they'll get it, and then at their recertification interview, as I was talking about, they will lose it because of budget cuts, or it was just a really hard semester, and then they have to apply again. And it's a never-ending process.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I think I can speak personally, like I've been out of school for a few years now. And so working in this space, it can be easy to lose sight of like why we're doing this work. And so I really appreciate you all sharing your lived experience in that. I want to zoom out a little bit, and I want to go to Mark first and just talking about like putting what they said into context, and what you said earlier about like really putting our money where our mouth is. Can you talk a bit about why these specific challenges really inhibit student success, or create inequities for student success?
Sure, and thank you, Emily and Zeph, for sharing your lived experience. I mean, there's nothing more powerful and urgent than that in this moment, especially as we sort of move into discussion about policy change. I mean, I'd say that some things in life are incredibly complex, and this is not. If you can't afford food, if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, if you are part of the 1 in 5 students who care for a dependent child of your own, and you're concerned for the nutritional intake of your family, that's going to have an impact on your learning, your college experience, and your future, right? We know from research that students who are food insecure are more likely to have a lower GPA. Duh. I find myself saying duh a lot in these conversations. Forced to take a reduced course load, and consider dropping or stopping out of college. And by subjecting more students to a work for food requirement, essentially, we're limiting student success. We know that from research that students who work intensively are much more likely to fall behind in class, receive lower grades, stop out of college. I call this the arithmetic problem. There's only so many hours in a day and energy in our bodies, right? For low-income students, working more than 15 hours a week is associated with a decrease in bachelor's degree attainment, right? So we are robbing Peter to pay Paul in some ways, by instituting these rules for students. We're being counterproductive, right? And one thing I'd say, I mean, I know we're talking about SNAP primarily today, and we've talked about the student rules. But I think one thing to lift up, and one thing we're finding in our work, is that college student food insecurity is strongly associated with mental health challenges, including depression and anxiety. And this is where we need to take a comprehensive view of basic needs insecurity, and we need policymakers to understand that the interventions to address it are going to need to be holistic, right? There is next to no federal support outside of a very tiny set of grant programs to address college student mental health, right? Anyone who has had the experience of trying to find, afford, and consistently address mental health challenges can tell you how challenging it is on a good day. And so what we're doing by not addressing food insecurity, by making folks jump through hoops just to afford food for their families or put a roof over their heads in the case of housing insecurity, is we're foisting students into a situation where they then have to navigate even more bureaucracy outside of the SNAP bureaucracy, which we've sort of touched on and Irene's talked about, and we'll talk about a little bit more, to address the after effects of not being able to afford food, right? So, I think that from a policy perspective, none of this is rocket science, right? We need to make sure that students can address, their basic needs in order to achieve what they want to achieve in life, whether that's in the classroom or beyond. And unfortunately, the policies and practices in place are either too complex or actively work against students being able to do that.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate that perspective that you gave. And I see in the Q&A someone asked, sort of addressing this common criticism that everyone should do work study or take out student loans, and sort of why that's unreasonable. And I really appreciate the work that like the Hope Center and other groups are doing, just having a holistic conversation about student basic needs and college affordability and what it's like to be a student today and what students today need in order to be successful. I think specifically like the pandemic really revealed a lot of ways our system has not worked, and it sort of brought those things to the surface and brought them to light. And I think that's why we sort of harp on the fact that these COVID era expansions were so critical, because it sort of provided us this way to like look at like, what if we did expand eligibility for students, even if just a little. FRAC, we really support the EATS Act, which is just to broaden student access. a ton, but even this COVID era flexibility was crucial in showing us how we can do things better. So I wanted to ask you, Erin, could you talk a little bit about how food insecurity sort of played out on the campus level, and then how you saw these COVID era flexibilities address some of the basic concerns that Mark and Zeph and Emily mentioned earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to kind of uplift what Mark said just now, but also earlier about, when we look at the food security rates, we look at like California, we've got 50%. But when you look at then those smaller demographics of like historically marginalized groups and those different categories, like it increases so much. And then if you have like multiple categories, let's say someone that's LGBTQI plus and they're Black, right? Then that jumps it even higher, right? So we got to think that when we're talking about student success in California and all over the country, we talk about equity. We talk about, the importance of that at universities and in education. And this is the issue that is then basically, feeding on that and increasing inequity, right? So it's something that's really, really critical. And I'm so glad we're discussing it. When we talk about the pandemic changes, we definitely can see that there was a jump in students that applied. And I think that something that's just really important to note in this topic is that the SNAP student eligibility rule makes it harder for everyone. It doesn't just make it harder for the student applying or the campus staff member that's trying to help them get through the process, or the county worker or the state. It costs everyone time and resources to implement this rule that doesn't apply to any other group. And then when we look on the flip side of that from the economic impact perspective, we know from USDA data that every dollar of SNAP creates $1.54 in economic activity. And so it's already providing kind of paying for itself in that way. And when we looked at the data where before the pandemic relief or exemptions ended, and we could kind of calculate where the economic impact was for that data we have for the 50 campuses. And that alone was almost $100 million of economic impact just in California, just from those 50 campuses and just from the data that we had, right? So it has such a larger impact than I think that we see. And so there's always this conversation about removing this rule could cost money, but it's also going to contribute to significant economic impact, not only in that local community, but then you have students that are completing degrees and going into the job force and paying taxes. And so it really is kind of a no-brainer in my mind. When we look at the data and we look at like where we're at, everything points to this being something that not only is going to pay for itself in economic impact, but longevity of the workforce. And anyways, we're just at a really interesting point in history. So just all those things that I just wanted to note and just appreciate the opportunity, to discuss this with everybody.
Awesome. I love that answer. And I'm really grateful for just the way that each of y'all have been able to share this from different perspectives. And I wanted to pivot to you two, Emily and Zeph, from a student advocate perspective. Like, you have this lived experience and you also have worked directly with students. But when we're talking about engaging in like people ask, like, what can you do to support students? And like, what does this look like? I wanted you two to be able to speak about what students specifically are doing to sort of like sound the alarm around these issues. I know the question came in earlier about just like what are the misconceptions that exist around students today, and like how we're changing that narrative and how we're, really pushing folks to understand that this is a serious issue. I wanted to ask you two, like, what are the specific ways in which students are engaging in advocacy and activism around SNAP eligibility and basic needs and security? And I'm going to start with Emily.
Okay. Well, with my work, I work for LSU's food pantry. I also was the Hunger Free Campus intern for Feeding Louisiana. So kind of two very different perspectives. I'll start with kind of what the state's doing, which has occurred because of student involvement. They recently created anti-hunger coalition and anti-hunger like designation for schools to receive, and they're required to have a food pantry as well as a student council addressing food insecurity, very vague, I know, and a SNAP application assister through financial aid. This is still happening, so we haven't really gotten that far yet. On the other hand, you have student involvement. So you have organizations like Swipe Out Hunger, which started at UCLA, great organization. They really help with meal swipes and meal swipe exchanges, which is a great solution, especially for schools that require their freshmen to buy meal swipes, but the freshmen don't use all of them. You also have the Food Recovery Network, which partners with dining halls and restaurants to prevent food from going in the garbage that's prepared and instead repackaged and then given to students on campus. You have school food pantries, food banks, however, really they designate it, but that's a large scale. It can be as small as a shelf in a classroom to as large as Boise State and LSU, where it's run with student workers and it's backed by the food bank and the state. But really, everything varies based on how far your campus has gotten so far on acknowledging food insecurity on your campus and what departments are willing to work with the students. I know at LSU, we are primarily a division of campus life who's kind of taken on the role of the food pantry and has taken it with open arms. But each university will be a bit different, and that is a difficulty. I also want to address Hillary's question about the criticisms for students, such as everyone should do work study or take out student loans. The normal that college students should be struggling and eating ramen every day should not be accepted. The fact that we portray that in movies and TV shows is something that is actually not a healthy environment. And eventually, if you tell students to go to school and then to work 20 hours a week, that student's going to burn out. If we say that a student should take out a loan, do they plan on working in a job where they're going to make enough money to repay that loan in a period of time that's financially responsible? There's just a lot of variation also in what a student's home life looks like, what their parental support looks like, and what they plan on doing after graduation that makes them more at risk for being food insecure, even if they do work study and they take out loans and they use their local resources. Even by using all of your resources, they still can be food insecure, and that's something that is unknown.
All of that, period. Zeph, do you want to add anything?
100%. Just piggybacking off that last question that we just talked about. Very real. I kind of agree. I work 4 jobs and I'm still food insecure. And that's 4 jobs on top of a 20-unit quarter. On top of like being food insecure and low income. I come from a family that like I make more. In one of my jobs, I make more hourly than what my mom makes currently. Which is really like my mom's been at that job for 17 years, which is like awful. But I digress. And the expectation for college students to just keep getting more jobs and to keep pulling out loans when that's what I've done, and I'm still having to prioritize a single meal each day because I can't afford to eat more than one meal a day. So that's very much like a real issue that I think people just don't quite grasp because media has normalized the college struggle far too much. It from what turned into a nuanced little hee hee ha ha joke has become like a genuine reality for almost every college student across the entire country, especially for ones like myself who are completely independent of their parents. I receive no financial support from my family at all, and that's out of choice. Anyways, enough of getting off on my soapbox. I also just want to talk about like federal and local advocacy that UCSA does. So in February of 2023, students and campus leaders from all 3 segments of higher education. Oh, so sorry. In February of 2024, I read that wrong. Students and campus leaders from all 3 segments of higher education, that would include the UC, the CSU, and our community colleges, and state and federal government representatives, and just a whole bunch or more of like grassroots organizations that are engaged with student success and advancing basic needs, are convening in Sacramento for the annual CHEBNA, California Higher Education Basic Needs Alliance Summit, and we're expecting 1,200 attendees. I will be there presenting on behalf of the
Zeph, I think your audio went out. Can you mute and unmute for me? It looks like their internet is spotty at the moment. But when they come back in, we'll give them an opportunity to finish their statement. Because I really do want them to be able to tell you about the work that they're doing. Ruben says too much fire, the internet couldn't handle it. I agree. So while we wait for them to hop back on, I did, let me see. I really want them to finish talking. So we're almost at time to sort of transition a bit, but I did want to give Mark and Aaron a bit of time to talk about some of the advocacy work that they're doing. I know that the Hope Center doesn't solely focus on food insecurity. You're doing some work around college affordability, like you mentioned, health and mental health, childcare. So can you talk a little bit about that work? And then Zeph, I'm gonna give Mark a second to speak, and then we'll come back to you to talk about Chapman.
I'll be brief because I want to hear the fire that was coming through. It was really good. Yeah, I mean, I think I just mentioned briefly, and I know Irene, you talked about, and we're going to talk about the EATS Act. I think we think about this in a few major categories, right? I mean, I think we need, from a federal perspective, we need to reform the student rules in SNAP to better reflect the experience of students and remove the necessity for so many students of a 20-hour work for food rule, or just allow more students to be eligible without being subject to all of the existing and confusing maze of exemptions. So that, the most prominent way to do this would be through the EATS Act, which I know we're going to talk about. But there's other bills as well that would, including the Student Food Security Act, which would sort of return us and expand the list of exemptions that allowed folks to qualify for SNAP if they were a very low income student, qualified for maximum Pell Grant, or eligible for work study, not just participating in it. So allowing more avenues. But I think so that's one bucket, sort of, reforming the rules, right? In addition to that, and this spans both Congress and the administration at the federal level, I think we need, and we're working on expanding to have far greater funding for student basic needs broadly, right? This can come in the form of timely and sufficient emergency aid, which we saw was so crucial during the pandemic, and can be a real lifeline for students. And most students cite food as the thing they're spending emergency aid on. We can do it by lowering the cost of attendance facing students. Part of the reason that students are food insecure and having trouble affording basic expenses is because the tuition and costs are too damn high. Again, another sort of duh moment, I think. But anything to bring down costs for students, we believe, will sort of, have downstream effects on the ability to afford food. And then the last thing, I think even as we're attempting to sort of do fundamental reforms, and even as we're attempting to put far more resources into the system than we have, and putting our money where our mouth is, we need to ensure that USDA, the Department of Education, other agencies are doing a much better job and continuing the good work, as Alberto does on a daily basis, of connecting currently eligible students for benefits. We know that, as Irene mentioned, far more students are likely eligible for SNAP than are receiving it, right? They either have limited knowledge, they're given bad or incorrect information, they have trouble signing up. So we need to remove the administrative burdens that exist that prevent them from getting the benefits that they are entitled to and eligible for. That can take the form of leveraging data from the FAFSA and other things to make it sort of much easier for students to jump through those initial hoops. There's other regulatory measures, like ensuring institutions accurately estimate and provide information on cost of attendance, including food, requiring institutional outreach on public benefits like SNAP. There's any number of things we can do to make it so that our current super messed up system is a little bit less messed up as we're trying to reform it underneath it. So that's my little soapbox. And I want Zeph to go because I want their soapbox.
Yes, we enjoy soapboxes over here. Zeph, can you talk a bit more about Shebna and some of the other work that UCSA is doing?
Yeah, of course. So sorry. The UC Davis internet is notoriously horrible. And I guess like where I'm at is kind of a dead spot, so my bad. But when I left off, I was just going through like some of the bills that we've supported at the state level. Every year we host the student lobby conference where we bring students from all across the UC. We try to focus on minority groups to bring them to the Capitol to lobby, and we have a very similar program in DC, which will be happening this year as well. So for the DC friends, you might see me on the Hill sometime soon. Um, anyways, kind of like switching gears over to our federal advocacy, because I do believe that is something that UCSA is also just incredibly strong in. We have mobilized and lobbied in support of the SNAP, in support of the EATS Act, and we, I believe last year one of our champions, like was just really like hammering out on the EATS Act, trying to get people to sign. I know that currently myself and my federal government relations team are working on trying to get the last few Democrats in California to sign out of the EATS Act. We've been meeting with them, we've been pushing for it. So fingers crossed that they do. Also, this year, UCSA has been collecting testimonials for the renewal of the Agricultural Improvement Act, otherwise known as the Farm Bill, which addresses everything from agricultural programs, food distribution programs, crop insurance, commodities, subsidies, conservation efforts, and SNAP EBT benefits. One thing that I do also want to highlight is that we are also seeking an expansion of Indian reservation food distribution programs to include fresh fruits and veggies. I didn't mention it in my intro, but hello, my name is Zeph. I am Sichago Lakota, which is the lower Belay tribe in the Black Hills of South Dakota. I lived on the reservation for several years of my life, and let me tell you, when I say the food distribution programs are really horrible on reservations, they are. It's mostly canned goods and dried beans, which have little to no nutritional value, and a lot of like this like lack of hello from South Dakota. Nice to see you, Katie. And this lack of like nutritional value leads to a common theme that we see with Indigenous communities regarding like diabetes. Also, like on the Indigenous note, while I'm here now, I'm on this soapbox. So a lot of Indigenous people do qualify for SNAP benefits because a lot of us are below the poverty line. However, when it comes to people who live on the reservation, the closest stores that have decent prices and accept EBT are hours away. So for my reservation, I lived on Rosebud. It's the closest Walmart. It's almost an hour and a half away from my reservation. So I have to pay for gas and time when I want to go there, especially like and my cousins and everything like that. So that's also like accessibility, like accessibility beyond qualifying for SNAP benefits is a really big thing. We need to think about the people who live in rural counties, especially on reservations, and think about where the closest stores that to them are that not only have access to EBT benefits, but have access to cheap EBT benefits, because the stores and reservations, it's $16 for a loaf of bread. So like that's something to take consideration. Circling back to Chebna, because we had some like big questions about Chebna. So Chebna is funded by the UC, CSUs, and CCs. So if you're looking for a similar program in your respective states, I would definitely explore looking at funding from the universities in the area to see if they're willing to organize something like this. And actually, the facilitator for the panel that I'm serving on is in attendance. Hello, Glenn. So if you have any questions, I put my email in the chat earlier, but it's basicneeds@ucsa.org. If you want to chat with me about Chebna, if you want to know what I'm talking about, if you want to know what other people are talking about, let me know and I can get the information to you guys.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, the recording, the slides, our panelists' contact information and resources that the panelists mentioned will be sent in a follow-up email in the coming days. So make sure that you're on the lookout for that. But we have to close out this panel discussion. I want to end this by asking each of our panelists to give us one word that sort of summarizes how you feel moving into this work going forward. I think for me, my one word is energized, but I'm curious to hear what each of your word is, and then we'll go ahead and transition. So I'll start with Mark, and then we'll go Aaron, Emily, and Zeph, because that's how you're sitting on my screen.
I think my answer is duh.
Love that. Aaron?
I would say equity.
Great. Emily?
I would say non-traditional.
Good, I love that. And Zeph?
I would also have to go with equity.
Good, I love that. Thank you. Thanks to each of you. so much. And so we're going to go ahead and transition to Alberto from USDA. And Stephen, if you can pull up our slides, that would be great. But our audience or attendees, please feel free to let our panelists know in the chat how you felt about the discussion, and I'll pass it to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Irene, for inviting the USDA to be part of today's conversation. And thank you to the panelists. I was able to listen in and sort of really resonated with all the conversations that were taking place. So for context, my name is Alberto Gonzalez. I'm a senior advisor for external engagement at the USDA's Food and Nutrition Service. I work here in Washington, D.C., but I'm originally from California, went to the UC systems, attended a junior college. And a lot of what you all shared really resonated with me because, like many of you on this call today, I was also food insecure as a college student. There was a time where my dad lost his job, my mom wasn't working, my other sister was in college, and I could not afford food. And it was thankfully I had developed a friendship with some custodian women on campus at UC Berkeley when I was there. And they actually have bought me food a couple of times to make me just live through the month. So I'm just very grateful for that experience that I still carry with me today. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you about the work that we're doing at the USDA's Food and Nutrition Service. We have a lot that we're doing as a department, but I wanted to pay particular attention to our nutrition security and nutrition assistance programs with respect to college students. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So just to take a step back, we are taking a multi-pronged approach to ensure access for eligible college students. I recognize, as many of you all discussed, that there are a number of challenges, and we are working to address those. I will mention that this is a priority for the Biden-Harris administration. It's a priority for Secretary Vilsack. In case y'all may be aware, last year we hosted a White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. And in that, with that conference, we had a national strategy that was released that's available online that included a number of actions to help expand access to SNAP for college students. And that involves us working with Congress because a lot of these changes would require congressional action. So it's really great to hear the work that's happening from the folks that are on today's call in terms of engaging your local, state, and federal leaders on the stories that you all are experiencing in order to drive these changes. So that is very key because whatever is changed in statute informs how we implement these programs. So it was very helpful to hear about your work on the Farm Bill going into next year. In addition, as we administer a suite of more than 16 federal nutrition assistance programs as the USDA's Food and Nutrition Service. So one of them is on SNAP. And we've been working closely working in collaboration with the Department of Education to really think about how we can make it easier for our respective agencies and state agencies to work together so that we're able to identify those students that are eligible for SNAP but may not be enrolled, really thinking about how we can leverage our resources and connections to make this connection. I actually had the opportunity to visit Southern California last year, where I was able to see the basic needs program at Cal State Dominguez Hills in South LA. I was able to meet with staff from LA County SNAP to talk about the work that's been happening to ensure that they're able to identify college students who are food insecure and eligible for SNAP, and what are the best ways to be able to reach them, to get them connected to CalFresh in California specifically. So a few other points I wanted to uplift with my limited time here today. So each fiscal year, state agencies or the USDA releases provides guidance for state SNAP agencies to target particular populations when it comes to SNAP outreach. And so college students have, that's something we're working on, is to have college students be part of that targeted outreach. So making sure that state agencies are aware that college students are a priority population for SNAP, and to encourage them to work with organizations, partners that may be on today's call, really to make these connections so that they're able to reach all all of those eligible for our programs. We have information on our website. I'm happy to drop a link at some point during the webinar where you can learn about more information about SNAP student eligibility. We've been also holding webinars as we're doing today, presenting at conferences, issuing guidance on student eligibility, just to make it clear about the current status of SNAP student eligibility, and really working to engage trusted messengers out there to get the word out about our programs. I did just want to take a minute because I know there was a couple of conversations that we touched on with respect to nutrition security and local foods. So one of the key initiatives for the USDA is to advance our food and nutrition security initiative, which means that we want to ensure that people have access to healthy, safe, affordable foods that are essential to optimal health and well-being. And this is a game changer initiative that we announced really to build on the lessons learned from COVID. We know that during COVID, communities that it exacerbated health disparities for many populations, particularly Black and Brown populations in our country. And so we've been working to leverage our suite of nutrition programs to expand access to healthy foods. And then I'll mention that we're also, leveraging our other programs like SNAP Education, SNAP Nutrition Education, or SNAP Ed, which partners with many universities across the country to provide nutrition education and support for college students on campus as well. And then tribal, so last week the White House hosted a tribal leaders summit, and certainly a lot of the issues that we've discussed briefly on the webinar today are things that are top of mind for the USDA. We have a Office of Tribal Relations. We've been working to really bolster our programs like the food distribution program on Indian reservations, but also programs like SNAP and WIC and our school meals. So just wanted to make clear that we are deeply committed to bolstering our programs, increasing access to healthy, nutritious foods for all those who are eligible, and working with the White House and other departments to ensure that we're able to access all those college students that are eligible for our program. So I just want to make that clear on today's webinar. So we can move on to the next slide. So these are a few links to our websites, and I wanted to also let folks know on today's webinar that we have regional offices across the country. We have 7 that work very closely with our state nutrition education agencies, including SNAP. So if you want to be connected with them, please reach out to me, or you can go on our website. And our regional offices work closely with other stakeholders who may also be working on issues to address food insecurity on college campuses. So it's another way to connect with other key stakeholders that might be helpful for your efforts. Next slide. So I just put a few suggestions on what you can do, but certainly please feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions on the work that the USDA is doing. As I mentioned, we're collaborating with the Department of Education. We're working closely with our state agencies to ensure that college students are a key priority population with respect to SNAP outreach. The one thing I didn't mention earlier is that with regards to the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health, there were also a number of non-federal commitments to advance the national strategy. And one of them I wanted to highlight is from Benefits Data Trust, which has been working to develop and work with different systems to make it easier to, again, identify college students who may be eligible for programs like SNAP. So, there's a commitment from the federal government, from USDA, from the White House, but also from non-federal partners to really improve the system that we have now to make it reflect what we have today and the situation that we have today. Circling back to what you can do, so connecting with our local SNAP agency partners, SNAP Nutrition Education community partners. We have more than 30,000 SNAP Nutrition Education partners, SNAP Nutrition community partners across the country that you can leverage. as you are doing, elevating your voice and stories with federal, state, and local leaders. It's critical for them to hear your perspective, your voices, and keep us posted on your work. If there's an exciting partnership that you have going on in your state or your community, please let us know. We'd love to be aware and be connected about those initiatives. And help us promote our suite of nutrition assistance programs. We have, again, more than 16 federal nutrition assistance programs. We also have two new programs, non-congregate summer feeding and summer EBT, that were created by Congress last year. So this is another powerful tool to help, particularly those students who have kids who may be eligible for this program. I'm very mindful of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Irene, and see if folks have any questions. But thank you for your time and attention.
Yeah, so we have time. We have time for about one question for USDA, if anybody has any. And Alberto, feel free to look through the Q&A to see if there's any questions that you can answer on your end. So I'm not seeing any at the moment specifically for USDA, and I'm personally really anxious to get to our next portion, which is space for you all to take action. So thank you so much, Alberto. Again, all of the resources, the slides that folks have mentioned today, we will be sure to send out in a follow-up email, as well as the panelists' contact information if you want to continue those conversations. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to the next slide. So we've talked a lot about the EATS Act, which stands for the Enhancing Access to SNAP Act. And what this act does would remove that burdensome work for food rule for college students to access SNAP. And so what's critical about the EATS Act is that it really meets the needs of today's college students. We've heard extensively from Emily and Zeph and Aaron and Mark just about the incredible work they're doing and how we're seeing the impact of this expanded eligibility for students. It builds on these lessons during the pandemic, and it leverages the strength that SNAP already has. And so what we're going to ask you all to do is, at this moment, what we wanted to do is sort of have this big rush of messages to members of Congress asking them to sign on in support of the EATS Act. And so we're going to put a link in the chat, but we're asking that you fill out our FRAC Action Network, which will ask your name and your contact information and your state. And it will populate an email for you to send specifically to your senator or representative to tell them that it's really critical that we sign on to the EATS Act to support today's college students and being successful. So we're going to give you a few minutes to do that. And while you do that, I will pass it over to Salam to give any last comments.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Really, while you're filling that out, I just want you to know that for anybody who felt alone in the struggle, I really hope you saw today in the comments section and from the panelists that you are not alone. All these millions of college students and post-secondary, post-grad students are not alone in this struggle, a struggle they may not even know is going on. So it's so important that we truly embrace that the solution to this whole eligibility issue is something that not only we can do, but it was actually done. So all we have to do is be persistent and consistent in applying the pressure to get this done in our states and nationally. Keep an eye on your emails for more information from FRAC. We'll share the recording, slides, report, actions to take, and so much more with you, which is going to give you some great talking points to talk about with your family and friends, especially during this upcoming holiday season, about why we need to pass the Enhanced Access to SNAP Act. Because the only hunger that we ever want you to experience is the hunger to learn. So thank you so much for your engagement today and also in the days ahead. Strive and thrive, y'all.